Lyndon Baines Johnson, often simply known as LBJ, was born on August 27, 1908, in a small three-room farmhouse on the banks of the Pedernales River near Stonewall, Texas, a rugged corner of the Texas hill country where the landscape was a mosaic of scrubby oaks, limestone hills, and dry creek beds that spoke to the hardscrabble life of frontier farmers. He was the first of 5 children born to Samuel Ely Johnson, Jr., a tall, lanky man with a booming voice and a deep commitment to public service, who had served 3 terms in the Texas House of Representatives as a progressive Democrat advocating for rural electrification and education reform, and Rebecca Baines Johnson, a refined woman of Scottish-Irish descent who had studied journalism at Baylor University and dreamed of a literary life but settled into the role of a ranch wife, reading Shakespeare aloud to her children by lamplight and instilling in them a love for learning amid the isolation of their remote homestead. The Johnsons' roots ran deep in Texas. Sam's grandfather, a Baptist preacher and Confederate veteran, had helped settle the area, and the family name was etched into the local geography. Johnson City, 20 miles away, was named for LBJ's great-grandfather Jesse Johnson, a settler who arrived in 1855. From the outset, young Lyndon's life was marked by financial precarity. His father, once prosperous as a rancher and cotton speculator, lost much of his wealth in the 1910s due to bad investments and a devastating drought that turned the Pedernales into a dusty trickle, forcing the family to sell off land and livestock. An experience that seared into Lyndon a visceral hatred of poverty and a determination to wield power as a tool for uplift. As a boy, he was wiry and restless, with a mop of brown hair, sharp blue eyes, and an outsized personality that alternated between charm and bullying. He roamed the hills on horseback, hunting jackrabbits with a slingshot and organizing neighborhood baseball games where he always captained his team, demanding loyalty from playmates like his cousin Roy while fiercely defending his younger siblings, sister Rebecca, brothers Josefa, Sam Houston, and Lucia, from local bullies. The family's Christadelphian faith, a non-Trinitarian sect emphasizing Bible study and social justice, influenced young Lyndon, who attended a one-room schoolhouse in Stonewall where he devoured Mark Twain and the Bible but chafed at rote memorization, often skipping class to fish in the river or debate politics with his father, who regaled him with stories of legislative battles against corrupt oil barons. By age 11, the family moved to nearby Johnson City, a dusty crossroads with a population of 300, where Sam built a 2-story Victorian home on Avenue G, and Lyndon enrolled at Johnson City High School, a clapboard building with potbelly stoves, where he was a talkative ringleader, elected class president in his junior year and starring in school plays as a bombastic orator, though his grades were middling. He graduated 36th out of 41 in 1924 at age 15, a fact he later downplayed with jokes about his hillbilly roots. Pressed by his ambitious mother, who saw education as escape from rural drudgery, Lyndon enrolled that fall at Southwest Texas State Teachers College, now Texas State University, in San Marcos, a modest campus of red brick buildings amid live oaks, but after a few weeks of struggling with algebra and Latin, he dropped out, hitchhiking to California to visit an uncle in Santa Ana, where he worked odd jobs washing dishes and picking cotton for $1 a day, sleeping in a tent by the San Joaquin River, and sending postcards home boasting of his adventure, though the Great Depression's early shadows made it a grim reality check, prompting his return to Texas in 1925 to labor as a day worker on road crews, swinging a pickaxe under the relentless sun for 50 cents an hour, an experience that fueled his lifelong empathy for the working poor and disdain for idle wealth. Re-enrolling at Southwest Texas State in 1927 at age 19, Lyndon transformed from a wayward youth into a driven student, financing his education through sheer grit, waiting tables at a San Marcos cafe for 10 cents an hour plus tips, selling books door to door, and even borrowing $75 from a local bank at 10% interest, which he repaid by tutoring slower classmates in history and economics. The campus, with its 300 students and dusty quadrangles, became his proving ground. He joined the debating team, where his rapid-fire delivery and command of facts earned him statewide acclaim, and dove into campus politics, serving as president of the Student Council and editor of the College Star, the weekly newspaper, where he crusaded against tuition hikes and for better dormitories, honing a wheeler-dealer style that involved arm-twisting professors and rallying freshmen with fiery speeches delivered from soapboxes on the lawn. It was here that Lyndon met Claudia Alta Taylor, nicknamed Lady Bird since infancy by a nursemaid who declared her prettier than a bird, a poised 21-year-old from Alabama with auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and a quiet intelligence honed at the elite St. Mary's Episcopal School for Girls in Sewanee, Tennessee, and the University of Texas, where she earned a journalism degree in 1933. They met in the summer of 1934 at a San Marcos drugstore soda fountain, where the lanky, 6 feet 3 inches Lyndon, then 25, and already balding at the temples, cornered her with a barrage of questions about her life, proposing marriage after just 2 weeks of whirlwind dates involving drives through the hill country and discussions of poetry. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was her favorite, despite her reservations about his intensity and lack of prospects, a courtship that culminated in their wedding on November 17, 1934, at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in San Antonio, a simple affair with 20 guests where Lady Bird wore a $2.50 lace dress from a Houston department store, and Lyndon gifted her a $2.50 ring, vowing in a handwritten note to build us a life of purpose and love. Their union, though tested by his ambition and her bouts of depression, proved enduring. Lady Bird brought emotional steadiness and later financial acumen, investing in Austin radio station KTBC in 1951, which grew into a multimillion-dollar media empire, while Lyndon credited her with saving my soul during his darkest political days. Graduating in 1930 with a Bachelor of Science in History and a teaching certificate, Lyndon briefly taught English and public speaking at Pearsall High School in South Texas, a one-room adobe school where he coached debate and drove students home in his battered Ford. But the poverty-stricken Mexican-American community, children arriving barefoot and malnourished, left him restless, prompting a move to Houston's Sam Houston High School in 1931, where he taught debate to future Congressman Albert Thomas and impressed Principal Harleen Stone with his energy, though the classroom's limitations frustrated him, leading him to politics after witnessing a congressional campaign rally. Lyndon's entry into national politics came swiftly in 1931, at age 22, when he was appointed legislative secretary, or dollar-a-year man, to newly elected U.S. Representative Richard M. Claybird, a wealthy scion of the King Ranch dynasty recommended by Lyndon's father and state senator Welly Hopkins, a family friend who saw potential in the young man's tenacity. Claybird, a genial but indolent Democrat from Texas's 18th district, delegated much to Lyndon, who immersed himself in the marble halls of the Cannon House office building, mastering the arcane rules of procedure, schmoozing committee chairmen over cigars in the House restaurant, and building a network that included Vice President John Nance Garner, the Cactus Jack Texan who became a mentor, and Speaker Sam Rayburn, the Mr. Sam of Texas lore whose Longworth House office became Lyndon's second home. Arriving in Washington amid the Great Depression's nadir, with breadlines snaking through Lafayette Square and Hooverville sprouting along the Anacostia, Lyndon embraced Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal with evangelical fervor after FDR's 1932 landslide, volunteering for the 1932 Texas Democratic Convention where he seconded FDR's nomination and organized youth rallies, earning a reputation as a tireless operator who worked 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in his office and subsisting on coffee and cornbread. By 1933, he had become Speaker of the Little Congress, an informal caucus of 250 congressional aides that lobbied for New Deal bills like the Tennessee Valley Authority, and in 1935, at 26, FDR appointed him Texas State Director of the National Youth Administration, NYA, a Depression-era program providing jobs and education to 18 to 25-year-olds. Lyndon turned it into a powerhouse, disbursing $1.5 million to employ 18,000 Texans in 6 months, building parks, roads, and libraries, while using it as a patronage machine to build loyalty among college students and Chicano leaders, personally interviewing applicants and firing slackers, a hands-on style that biographer Robert Caro describes as demanding the impossible and getting it. His marriage to Lady Bird that November provided ballast. She managed their modest Alexandria apartment, typed his speeches, and endured his absences, though their first years were childless until daughter Linda Bird arrived in 1944 and Lucy Baines in 1947, both named for Lady Bird's Alabama roots. Lyndon's NYA success catapulted him into the 1937 special election for Texas's 10th congressional district after incumbent James P. Buchanan's death, a sprawling central Texas seat from Austin to Waco encompassing cotton farms and oil fields, campaigning on horseback and by truck, promising electrification and flood control. He narrowly defeated several rivals in a runoff, winning 29,000 votes to take office on April 10, 1937, at age 28, the youngest Texan in Congress, where he roomed with Richard Clayburgh and future President Richard Nixon in a Georgetown boarding house, forging bipartisan bonds while championing FDR's agenda. As a freshman congressman from 1937 to 1949, Lyndon Johnson proved a masterful operator, securing $10 million for the Colorado River Authority to build dams like Mansfield that irrigated 1 million acres and generated power for rural homes, earning him the moniker, Electrifier of the Hill Country, from grateful farmers who sent hams and pecans to his office, and pushing the Rural Electrification Administration that brought lights to 90% of Texas farms by 1945, a legacy he touted in every speech. Loyal to FDR, he voted for the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, raising the minimum wage to 25 cents an hour, and the Social Security amendments, but his record on civil rights was mixed. He opposed anti-lynching bills in 1937 and 1938 as unconstitutional, to appease Southern colleagues, though privately he confided to aides his disgust at mob violence, shaped by stories from his Kitula teaching days. World War II interrupted his legislative rhythm. On December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, the 33-year-old Lyndon volunteered for the Navy, pulling strings to serve as a lieutenant commander in the Naval Reserve attached to the House Naval Affairs Committee, allowing him to blend active duty with oversight. In June 1942, aboard the USS Hancock in the Pacific, he joined a bombing mission over Japanese-held New Guinea as an observer. The B-26 Marauder he rode in, dubbed the Wabash Cannonball, taking flak that damaged engines, forcing a ditching in the Owen Stanley Range. Lyndon urged the pilot to press on, earning a Silver Star from General Douglas MacArthur for gallantry in action, though later investigations by historian Doris Kearns Goodwin revealed the plane returned safely after switching with another, suggesting the award was partly political, a medal Lyndon wore proudly for the rest of his life, pinning it to his lapel during 1964 campaign stops. The war hardened him. He witnessed Japanese atrocities in newsreels and confided to Lady Bird his fear of a totalitarian world without American resolve, but domestic scandals loomed. In 1943, the House Banking Committee investigated his ties to a Brown and Root construction firm that won $90 million in shipbuilding contracts after $20,000 in contributions to his campaign, though he escaped censure by testifying he knew nothing of the pass-the-hat scheme. In 1941, Lyndon had run for the Senate in a special election after Morris Shepherd's death, barnstorming Texas in a DC-3 plane funded by oilman Clint Murchison, but lost by 5,000 votes to Pappy O'Daniel, the flour magnate and Hillbilly Boys radio host, amid whispers of vote buying by Texas Rangers on O'Daniel's payroll. Undeterred, in 1948, he challenged popular Governor Coke Stevenson in the Democratic primary for the Senate, a brutal contest where Lyndon trailed by 20,000 votes until late returns from Jim Wells County, Box 13, stuffed with 202 handwritten ballots at 6 a.m. by Registrar Louis Salas, a Stevenson ally turned Johnson supporter after threats, flipped the race by 87 votes out of 988,295 cast, earning the lifelong nickname Landslide Lyndon and fueling lawsuits that reached the Supreme Court, which ruled in his favor on technicalities, though Caro in Means of Ascent details how Johnson orchestrated a statewide machine of poll watchers and cash-stuffed envelopes to steal the election, a ruthless pragmatism that defined his ascent. Sworn in as junior senator on January 3, 1949, at age 40, Lyndon Johnson quickly shed his New Deal idealism for Southern conservatism to woo oil barons and bankers, voting against Truman's Fair Deal and public housing bills while securing $100 million for Texas highways and dams. But his ambition propelled him to Democratic whip in 1951 under Majority Leader Ernest McFarland, where he mastered the Johnson treatment, a towering, finger-jabbing, face-to-face harangue that cowed opponents, as described by aide Horace Busby. He'd move in close, his face a foot from yours, talking fast, his breath hot, until you agreed just to breathe. A massive heart attack on July 2, 1955, at age 46, clutching his chest during a drive from the ranch to San Antonio, saved by Lady Bird's quick call to Dr. George McMillan, nearly killed him, confining him to Bethesda Naval Hospital for 6 weeks, where he quit smoking cold turkey, lost 30 pounds, and reflected on mortality, confiding to aides, "I want to be president, but not at the cost of my family." Recovering, he seized the majority leader post in 1955 after Democrats' midterm gains, becoming at 46 the youngest ever, transforming the Senate into his personal fiefdom with 16-hour caucuses in his walnut-paneled office, trading committee chairmanships for votes on Eisenhower's interstate highways and civil rights. On civil rights, he navigated a tightrope. In 1956, he refused to sign the Southern Manifesto decrying Brown versus Board of Education, alienating Dixiecrats like Strom Thurmond but earning Northern praise, and in 1957 shepherded the first civil rights bill since Reconstruction, a watered-down voting rights measure that created a civil rights commission but exempted jury trials, passing after 60 days of arm-twisting where he cornered holdouts like Paul Douglas in cloakrooms, growling, "This bill is my baby, and I'll kill anyone who touches it wrong." The 1960 Civil Rights Act extended voting protections, and he backed NASA's creation in 1958, funneling $1 billion to Texas firms like Brown and Root for space contracts. Personally, the Johnsons' life blended ranching idol and Washington intrigue. Their 265-acre LBJ ranch on the Pedernales, bought in 1951 for $75 an acre, became the Texas White House, with Lady Bird's wildflower gardens and a herd of 400 Hereford cattle. Lyndon tended himself, riding fence lines in Stetson and boots while plotting filibusters by phone. Though scandals nipped at him, the 1950s Bobby Baker affair, where his protege and Senate secretary pocketed kickbacks from vending machines in Senate offices, led to Baker's 1963 resignation and whispers of LBJ's complicity in influence peddling, though investigations cleared him but tarnished his image as Master of the Senate, a title Caro bestowed in his Pulitzer-winning biography. In 1960, Lyndon sought the Democratic presidential nomination, entering with 300 delegates from Southern primaries but clashing with the Kennedy machine at the Los Angeles Convention, where he lambasted JFK as a Massachusetts snob in private but accepted the vice presidential nod on July 14 after Adlai Stevenson's urging, a ticket-balancing move to court Texas's 24 electoral votes and the Solid South, with Lady Bird campaigning tirelessly despite death threats from segregationists. The Kennedy-Johnson ticket eked out a 118,000-vote win over Richard Nixon on November 8, 1960. Lyndon also won re-election to the Senate with 58%, but as vice president from 1961, he chafed in the ceremonial role, presiding over the Senate in morning coat while feeling sidelined by Bobby Kennedy's disdain, assigned busy work, like chairing the Space Council where he pushed Apollo funding to $5 billion and the Equal Employment Opportunity Committee combating federal discrimination. He traveled abroad, to Finland for a sauna with President Urho Kekkonen, Pakistan for a camel ride with Ayub Khan, projecting American vigor but privately fuming at JFK's coolness, once snapping to aide Walter Jenkins, "Those Harvard boys think I'm a cowboy," though he bonded with Sam Rayburn over bourbon in the majority leader's hideaway. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 saw him urging caution in ExComm meetings, advocating quarantine over invasion, and he supported the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, but his influence waned as Vietnam's advisory role grew to 16,000 troops. Tragedy thrust him to the pinnacle on November 22, 1963, in Dallas, aboard the presidential motorcade in an open Lincoln convertible, waving to crowds along Elm Street. Lyndon and Lady Bird sat 2 cars behind the Kennedys when shots rang out at 12:30 p.m. Governor John Connally wounded, JFK fatally shot in the head, prompting Secret Service agent Rufus Youngblood to shield LBJ by throwing him to the floorboard as the car sped to Parkland Hospital. At 2:38 p.m., in a cramped cabin on Air Force One at Love Field, federal judge Sarah T. Hughes administered the oath to the 55-year-old Lyndon, his hand on a Catholic missal as Jacqueline Kennedy, blood-stained and stone-faced, stood beside, the Bible held by Lady Bird, who whispered, "The power is yours now, Lyndon," a moment captured in a photo that symbolized the seamless transfer amid national shock. with LBJ ordering the plane wheels up within minutes to return to Washington, declaring to aides, "I need you more than ever," and vowing continuity with Kennedy's agenda. As 36th president from November 22, 1963, to January 20, 1969, Lyndon Johnson wielded the Oval Office like a legislative battering ram, transforming grief over JFK's death into momentum for his Great Society, a sweeping vision of American renewal announced in his January 8, 1964, State of the Union address, where he thundered, "We have the opportunity to move not only toward the rich society and the powerful society, but upward to the Great Society, channeling New Deal energy into eradicating poverty, ignorance, and discrimination." Elected in a 61% landslide over Barry Goldwater on November 3, 1964, collecting 486 electoral votes to Goldwater's 52 amid fears of nuclear escalation from the Arizona senators, extremism in defense of liberty, rhetoric, LBJ commanded Democratic supermajorities, 295 to 140 House, 68 to 32 Senate, unleashing a torrent of 1,000 bills in his first year, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, signed July 2 in the East Room amid 250 guests like Martin Luther King Jr., prohibiting segregation in public accommodations, schools, and employment, a 300,000-word behemoth that overcame Southern filibusters through Lyndon's phone calls to senators like James Eastland, "I've got your votes or I'll bury you," and his televised appeals invoking the clear and simple commands of justice. The Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 birthed Head Start for preschoolers, Job Corps for vocational training, VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, as a domestic Peace Corps, and community action programs empowering the poor, with $947 million allocated to wage war on poverty, that LBJ declared in his April 1964 University of Michigan speech would give our fellow citizens a fair chance to develop their own capacities. Medicare and Medicaid, enacted July 30, 1965, in the Truman Library with former President Harry Truman looking on, LBJ quipping, "You were the first to propose it, and I'm proud to see it through," provided health insurance for 19 million elderly and millions more poor, funded by a 0.7% payroll tax. While the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 pumped $1.3 billion into schools, especially in low-income districts, fulfilling a dream from his Cutula days. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, spurred by Selma's Bloody Sunday on March 7, where state troopers clubbed marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, passed August 6 after LBJ's March 15 address, where he borrowed King's phrase, "We shall overcome," in a gravelly drawl that brought tears to civil rights leaders, banning literacy tests and poll taxes, deploying 1,000 federal examiners to register 250,000 black voters in Mississippi alone by 1966. Environmental triumphs included the Wilderness Act of 1964 preserving 9 million acres, the Highway Beautification Act of 1965, Lady Bird's pet project against billboards, and the Clean Air Act of 1965, while immigration reform in 1965 abolished national origin quotas, opening doors to Asians and Latinos. Yet hubris crept in. The Bobby Baker scandal erupted in 1963 when the Senate secretary resigned amid probes into kickbacks from vending machines and land deals tied to LBJ's inner circle, with whispers of the VP's involvement in a Fort Worth real estate scam. Though a 1964 grand jury cleared him, the taint lingered as Goldwater ads blared, "Unfit for the Oval Office." Walter Jenkins, LBJ's closest aide since 1939, resigned in October 1964 after a D.C. YMCA restroom arrest for disorderly conduct with a former State Department employee, a scandal LBJ dismissed as a Republican dirty trick, but which forced Jenkins into exile, highlighting the era's homophobia. Foreign policy cast a darker shadow, with Vietnam consuming LBJ's presidency like a slow-burning fuse. Inheriting JFK's 16,000 advisors from the 1961 Laos crisis and 1963 Diem coup, Lyndon escalated after the August 2 and 4, 1964, Gulf of Tonkin incidents, U.S. destroyers Maddox and Turner Joy allegedly attacked by North Vietnamese PT boats, though declassified tapes later revealed exaggeration. prompting the August 7 Gulf of Tonkin resolution granting all necessary measures, without a formal war declaration, a blank check Johnson signed with McNamara's urging, deploying Marines to Da Nang in March 1965 and bombing the North in Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained air campaign of 643,000 sorties dropping 3.2 million tons of bombs, more than in all of World War II. Troop levels surged to 184,000 by year's end, 385,000 in 1966, and 536,000 in 1968, costing $25 billion annually and 58,000 American lives by 1975, as LBJ micromanaged from the Situation Room, poring over MACV reports at 3 a.m. in his pajamas, confiding to aides, "I won't be the first president to lose a war," but ignoring dovish advice from Undersecretary George Ball, who warned in 1965 of a bottomless pit. Domestically, urban riots, Watts in August 1965 killing 34, Detroit in July 1967 with 43 dead and 7,000 arrested, erupted amid de facto segregation, prompting the Kerner Commission report in 1968 blaming white racism and calling for $10 billion in aid, which LBJ endorsed but underfunded. The 1968 Tet Offensive on January 30, a coordinated Viet Cong assault on 100 cities including Saigon's U.S. Embassy, killed 4,000 Americans but was a military rout for Hanoi, yet CBS anchor Walter Cronkite's February 27 broadcast declaring, "The bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate," crystallized public disillusion, with LBJ watching in the White House residence, turning to Lady Bird and sighing, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." Approval ratings plunged to 36%, anti-war protests swelled, 10,000 marching on the Pentagon in October 1967, feminists burning bras in Atlantic City, and primary challengers emerged, Eugene McCarthy's 42% in New Hampshire on March 12, 1968, and Robert Kennedy's entry, forcing LBJ's March 31 TV address where, after announcing bombing halts north of the 20th parallel to spur Paris talks, he stunned the nation, "I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president," a decision born of exhaustion, heart pains, and fear of electoral defeat, though he later claimed it was to focus on peace. The Democratic Convention in Chicago that August devolved into chaos, 10,000 protesters clashing with 12,000 police in Mayor Daley's police riot, tear gas wafting into the hall as Hubert Humphrey secured the nomination, while Nixon won the presidency on November 5 with Law and Order appeals, though LBJ's secret taping of calls revealed his bitterness at Nixon's sabotage of Vietnam talks via Anna Chennault's backchannel to Saigon. Retiring to the LBJ Ranch on January 20, 1969, at age 60, Lyndon Johnson withdrew from public life, his once robust frame gaunt from chain-smoking, resumed post-heart attack, and stress, spending days clearing mesquite with a chainsaw, earning a 1969 scar requiring stitches, or fishing the Pedernales for bass. While Lady Bird championed environmental causes through the National Wildlife Federation and their daughters pursued lives away from politics, Linda marrying presidential aide Chuck Robin. 1967 amid White House protests, Lucy wedding Air Force Captain Patrick Nugent in 1968 with Tricia Nixon as bridesmaid. He wrote memoirs, The Vantage Point, 1971, defending Vietnam as necessary containment and touting great society successes, poverty dropping from 19% to 12%, black voter registration rising 50%, but brooded over Watergate parallels, watching Nixon's 1974 resignation from his ranch TV with grim satisfaction, telling aides, "I knew that son of a bitch would drag us all down." Heart troubles persisted, a 1970 angioplasty at Brooke Army Medical Center inserted stents, and he suffered angina attacks, yet he ventured out for dedications, the LBJ Library in Austin on May 23, 1971, housing 40 million documents, or Vietnam Veterans Events, where he wept hugging amputees, whispering, "I should have done better for you boys." Isolation deepened, estranged from Bobby Kennedy after the 1968 campaign and feuding with Nixon over Vietnam leaks, he grew reclusive, dictating oral histories to historians like Doris Kearns Goodwin, who captured his raw reflections, "I took the wrong road in Vietnam, but we had to stop the dominoes." On January 22, 1973, at 64, after watching a college football game on TV at the ranch, Lyndon suffered a massive heart attack while talking on the phone with his Secret Service detail, collapsing in the bedroom amid scattered wild turkey bottles. Paramedics rushed him to Brooke Army, but he died at 4:33 p.m. His last words reportedly, "Lady Bird, tell the kids I love them," buried on January 25 at his boyhood ranch cemetery overlooking the Pedernales, a simple plot with a Texas oak marker attended by 1,800, including Nixon, who eulogized, "He was a doer, not a doubter." His legacy endures as a paradox, architect of the great society that expanded civil rights, Medicare serving 60 million today, voting rights enfranchising generations, and poverty's foe, lifting 20 million from destitution, yet scarred by Vietnam's 58,000 American dead and 2 million Vietnamese, a quagmire that divided a nation and ended his dreams, with historians like Robert Dallek in Flawed Giant deeming him the most underrated president for domestic triumphs amid foreign folly. His larger-than-life persona, 6 feet 4 inches, profane, wheedling, immortalized in caricatures but revered in Texas lore as the rancher president who bent history to his will. The mistakes that led to Lyndon B. Johnson's downfall were a tragic blend of hubris, miscalculation, and unyielding ambition that eroded his popularity and forced his 1968 withdrawal from re-election. Chief among them was the unchecked escalation of the Vietnam War, where his initial 1964 Gulf of Tonkin resolution, based on exaggerated reports of North Vietnamese attacks, granted carte blanche for intervention, ballooning U.S. troops from 23,000 to 553,000 by 1968 at a cost of $168 billion, over $1 trillion today, ignoring dovish warnings from George Ball and public protests that swelled to 500,000 in Washington by 1969, culminating in the Tet Offensive's media-fueled narrative shift that shattered illusions of victory and plunged approval ratings to 35%. His civil rights crusade, while morally triumphant, the 1964 Act and 1965 Voting Rights Act dismantling Jim Crow, alienated his Southern Democratic base, fracturing the party as Dixiecrats like George Wallace bolted to third-party runs, costing LBJ crucial 1968 support in states like Alabama and Mississippi. Scandals like the Bobby Baker influence peddling probe in 1963, exposing cronyism in government contracts, and the 1964 Walter Jenkins arrest for indecent exposure, which LBJ dismissed too curtly amid homophobic backlash, tarnished his image as a clean reformer. Personally, his domineering, Johnson treatment, bullying allies and micromanaging from the ranch, strained relationships, alienating Kennedy holdovers like Robert McNamara, who resigned in 1968 disillusioned by Vietnam lies, while his chain-smoking and stress-fueled heart issues, ignored post-1955 attack, foreshadowed decline. Ultimately, these errors, overreach abroad, division at home, and ethical lapses, transformed a masterful legislator into a beleaguered figure, his March 31, 1968, announcement a capitulation to a nation weary of his wars and weary of war.